Thanks for joining us for thanks for joining us for Farm to Markets number 16. If there's anything you'd like to talk, uh, no, I don't want to do it again.
Great outtake for our next one.
All right, this is Farm to Markets number 16, and our topics for this week are the $1 trillion coin, if you should retire, and the cost of running. While looking for solutions to the debt ceiling in 2011, a blog commentator and attorney, Carlos Mucha, suggested that the government mint a $1 trillion coin, thereby giving the government enough to pay its debts without increasing the debt ceiling. This idea is based on a 1997 law that allows the Treasury to mint a platinum coin of any denomination for any reason. So essentially, it's kind of like playing Monopoly. Is that it's 3 a.m. You're sitting on Baltic with no money, and you roll the dice so that that you land on Park Place, which happens to be owned by your 7-year-old daughter, and she expects to be paid. So what you do is you excuse yourself. You go upstairs, you find an online picture of Monopoly money, you print out a $100 bill, cut it out, and return to the table and go, here you go, honey, here's the $100 that I owe you. And then essentially, as you're playing the game, you sell enough assets to cover that $100. And as soon as you get $100, you tear it up and throw it in the garbage, essentially giving you a zero net balance to balance out that fraudulent $100 bill you put into the game. Drew, given that analogy, Drew, does the $1 trillion, what are your thoughts on a $1 trillion coin?
Well, I like that analogy, and I can't help but think that was an awfully specific anecdote. Perhaps you had that same situation with you and your children?
There's 3 p.m. instead of a.m. But.
Okay. No, it's not too far off of what our current fiat currency already is. The problem is mining fiat monopoly money that's backed by nothing at all is still monopoly money at the end of the day. Granted, minting a $1 trillion coin is more of an accounting move to gain some wiggle room. It wouldn't directly put $1 trillion into circulation. Now, with that said, I'm not a fan of this. Quite frankly, I think it's really weird. In fact, when I first started reading about this, I thought it was downright stupid. I thought about how it could cause inflation, how it's a backdoor for Congress to raise the debt ceiling, but mostly how silly it would make the US look to the rest of the world, possibly even making our debt worthless. But then thinking about it more, it's not like I'm suddenly disappointed in how our federal government is being run. I've been disappointed for years. It's not like suddenly, oh, they really got me that time. It's not like up until now, I thought the US government was some bastion of fiscal responsibility. The reality is we've been creating fiat currency for years. We've been overspending, we've been going into debt. And like the boy who cried wolf, I'll get rallied up the first few times, but when another silly idea comes along, I'm not gonna act like I'm surprised.
Erica, what do you think?
I'd just like to know if the government would treat my platinum credit card the same way as they will the platinum coin that they're going to create, and if I'll have the same rights and lack of responsibility once I'm using that.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, using Erica's plastic platinum credit card, I don't think it really matters. I think that the federal government, they could in fact make a plastic coin and sell it as a commemorative coin to the Fed, who essentially just invents cash out of thin air to pay for it. And now the Treasury has more money to spend. It really doesn't matter. It's platinum. The only reason we're even talking about platinum coins is because there's already laws against doing this with gold, silver, and copper coins. So they're thinking, what's the next precious metal we can use? Oh, we can use platinum. This isn't even a new idea. If you all remember, the Montana militia the militia movement of the 1990s, Bo Gritz, who actually ran for president, he actually used this as part of his campaign of using the platinum, coin gimmick to try to come up with cash to pay off the national debt. It's a ridiculous idea, but then again, in all defense of the politicians, and Drew, I understand exactly your cynicism towards our benevolent betters in government, but even intelligent people will take a look at some of the most absurd ideas so that at least they know the parameters of what's actually possible. Barack Obama talked about this seriously with his Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, but it never got off the ground because at the end of the day, they thought it was just as preposterous as we do. The real issue is that the president and his party, whether it's Republican or Democrat, they start sweating bullets whenever they get to these debt ceiling issues because the opposing party is going to come up with a bazillion excuses why we shouldn't extend our credit because it makes the guy in office sweat. But the reality is both parties are culpable for the completely inappropriate amount of debt that we carry, particularly with the peacetime economies we've been enjoying for decades. So I don't think this will ever get much traction, but it certainly is newsworthy because folks like us love to discuss it on these pundit shows.
No, it makes for a good conversation. I will point out is that on October 5th, Janet Yellen said that she will not use she didn't use specifically to say, I will not use this, but it was in Fed speak or whatever, but she basically said that she's not going to use this, I don't even know what you call it, like a maneuver, this strategy to try and increase to give the government enough money to pay their bills. So she said that back in last Tuesday, I believe. So it doesn't look like it's off the table. And they passed some short-term resolution anyways to kick the debt ceiling out till December. And I imagine we'll probably have some showdown then as well. But it looks like, it was considered in 2011, because considered in 2013, and was brought up again this year as a way that they don't have to either use budget reconciliation or pass legislation to actually raise the debt ceiling. And it's a bit technical. So is that, the monopoly analogy basically sums it up, but essentially what they do is the government runs out of money to pay their debts, but it's money that Congress has already allocated for spending. So it's not like they're deciding that they want to increase the debt ceiling by doing it. The government has already said they're going to spend the money, and we just need to do the technical procedure of actually raising the actual debt ceiling to fall in line with the spending that's already been allocated. And what the $1 trillion coin is, it's also a technical procedure where, yes, the Treasury is allowed to print commemorative coins in platinum, and it was originally designed so that some 13-year-old kid could buy a coin and put it in his collection, and the Treasury would have like a nominal amount of money from the sale of that coin. But if you read if you're what they consider a textualist, in the text of the law says that the Treasury can print a $1 trillion coin on platinum, specifically on platinum, like Joe said, in any denomination. And Carlos Mucha, who's attorney who apparently has no other life but to sit there on these monetary websites and think of this stuff, was reading through the commemorative coin laws and stumbled across this that said, hey, we could just throw $1 trillion on a commemorative coin, deposit it at the Federal Reserve. They could spend that money, and then as soon as we get done fighting about the debt ceiling, you raise the debt ceiling, and then the government issues $1 trillion worth of debt, sucks $1 trillion worth of money out of the economy, and essentially you've what they called sterilized the coin. And so it's just a technical procedure for doing this. The issues that it raises, though, is that you have unelected officials making these decisions. So for right now, Janet Yellen is the Treasury Secretary, and she's elected by the president, but she wasn't elected by Congress, or she wasn't, elected by any state or anything like that. And she basically has the decision whether she wants to strike this coin or not. And like I said, last Tuesday, she opted not to do it. But if she were to do it, it would open up a can of legal worms, whether we want to be follow the law as a textualist, or if we're following the spirit of the law, which is basically just designed for commemorative coins. So it's just a technical thing, and but it's pretty interesting though. The one last thing I'll say, as this gets pretty long, is that the number one comment I've seen online is that what happens if somebody steals the $1 trillion coin? And the answer is nothing, because if you steal the only $1 trillion US platinum coin and then try and spend it, somebody else can be like, hey, isn't that the missing US $1 trillion platinum coin? And like, no, it's not. It's like, well, then what is it? So So nobody's the government isn't too worried about anybody. If they were to actually do this, theft is not really an issue that anybody's worried about. So
I don't think the bank's just going to say, oh yeah, we'll just
hey,
put you
got the
back up
$1
your
trillion
truck, we'll load you up with $1 trillion.
we're wondering that thing, wouldn't you?
Well, your technical explanation was certainly accurate. The thing I'd like some of our listeners to understand, though, is that the Treasury can in fact coin or mint a $1 trillion coin, but who's going to buy it? It's going to be the Fed.
Right.
And the Fed is going to buy it with what $1 trillion? They're going to buy it with $1 trillion that they just turn on the printing presses and print up $1 trillion of monopoly money to buy it with. Now, the theory is that the Fed now has the ability to find somebody who's going to buy it as a commemorative coin. So they're looking for that investor, that coin collector geek, who has got his magnifying glass, is going to pay $1 trillion and $1, and the Fed gets to keep the dollar, for this whole purchase. It's ridiculous, and that's why I go back to the point of Erica's credit card. It doesn't matter. It's all just a game to come up with a way to put money. The government can't pay its debts, so they're figuring out ways where they can come up with the money. And here's just a fancy dancy way to produce $1 trillion. And I don't think it's going to fly. At the end of the day, I think both the Democrats and Republicans will allow the debt ceiling to be raised. And it'll be the 81st time we have done this, where we kick the can down the road without doing any reconciliation with this ongoing debt in a peacetime economy.
So actually, I have one more thing, Tom. I have this, it's a $100 trillion bill that I keep in my office. I think this is the first time I've actually got to take it out and talk about it. So I'm pretty excited there. But this is a $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. Basically, they printed this off when their economy was in a shambles. But this didn't even buy a cup of coffee in the peak of their hyperinflated economy. And now they're on the US dollar and their Zimbabwe economy has collapsed. But that just goes to show what happens. You can't just print something on a bill and expect it to have that worth.
Yeah, and to Joe's point is that, and maybe I'm wrong. I did some research on this, but my understanding was that once they deposit the $1 trillion coin at the Treasury, and so essentially instead of having $16 trillion worth of debt, they only essentially have $15 trillion worth of debt, so they can issue about $1 trillion worth of more debt just so they don't bump up against the ceiling. And then once Congress authorizes them to increase the amount of debt that they're allowed to, by debt, I mean, they usually they sell bonds into the market. And so once that happens, my understanding is that they would issue $1 trillion worth of bonds, and then so suck that money out of the economy. It was what they call sterilizing the coin, because you put $1,000 in of essentially money that you just made up, and then you issue $1,000 worth of debt, and then suck $1,000 worth of currency out of the economy. And then what you do there is that you can either destroy the dollar bills or you can destroy the coin. And my understanding was that they would just melt the coin down and it would be gone. And then you basically just be right where you would be if there was no debt ceiling issue. Is that?
It's all is a time delay. You're throwing $1 trillion coin in to do what you normally do when you have bipartisan support for that move. But it's the same, whether the Fed comes up with $1 trillion to buy a commemorative coin, or they come up with the fiat money to buy $1 trillion worth of Treasury securities, the outcome is the same. It just inflates the value of the dollar that we already have in circulation, which means that people who keep a significant portion of their net worth in cash, they just saw a devaluation of their holdings.
So who do you think should be on the $1 trillion coin?
A coin collector wants to know.
Yeah. All right. Well, can we just decide when to retire? Some people pick an age, and other people have a fixed dollar amount. But Joe, how do we really know when it's time to retire?
When your wife gives you permission to do so.
Is that why you're still sitting in that chair?
Some of us are better at getting that permission than others. So in all seriousness, is that this is an issue that comes up quite a bit in client conversations. I think the healthiest outcomes come, Tom, when investors they retire towards something instead of retiring away from something. Many times I've seen people, the only reason they work is because that's the only way they can buy groceries. But I think that's a rather unhealthy outlook on work. The healthiest outlook I look at are people that go to work every day because they believe that God created them to provide a special amount of creativity to society, and they provide that. For many of our customers, many of the people that work with Cocoa Enterprises, it's refreshing to see that they don't work for the money. Money just happens to be a real positive byproduct. And they tend to work for as long until they feel like they have nothing else left to offer. But we've got lots of clients who are working well into their 70s, not because they have to, but because they like to. Once again, if you find a better way to use your God-given talents to serve humanity by being retired, I think you should retire. But if you're just looking to retire to build up barns to put all your wealth, I just don't think that's a good idea.
Erica, what do you think?
Well, I as I sit here wondering what I will be doing answering the phone when I'm 67 for Cocoa Enterprises, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on retirement. My dad had the opportunity to retire early, and pretty much the entire family agreed he retired way too soon. My brother is on the cusp of retirement, and he is one of those who is of the age that could retire, but he has a monetary goal in mind. And so that's keeping him in his current job, one that I don't know if it brings him as much satisfaction as he would like to have. When my father retired, he retired because his job was no longer the job that he wanted it to be. He didn't feel he was contributing to the benefit of the society that he was working with, and moved on to better things. So in my point of view, I don't have a significant other telling me whether or not I can retire. That's going to be up to me, and at least right now. And so for me, it is a matter of whether or not I can support myself, whether or not I don't want to be dependent on Social Security or the government or any of those other things. I want to be able to live the kind of life I want to live and not have a number dictate how my day is going to be. So as long as I'm happy and healthy and working, coming to work is something that keeps my life interesting. And until it ceases to do so, I don't plan on retiring.
Drew, what do you think?
The good news is you don't necessarily have to retire. To echo what my dad said, I think it's important to retire towards something instead of just retiring because you think you're supposed to retire. When the golden years are upon you, it's really up to you if you want to continue to work, if you want to do different work, or if you want to do no work at all. Ultimately, whatever you decide, you'll need to make sure that your income supports whatever lifestyle you want, so you can enjoy your golden years with dignity. If you're already thinking of retiring, if you're in that boat, we can look at your financials and determine what kind of income you can expect to have in retirement. If you're a few years out from retirement, just continue to follow the Wealth Builders milestones. Get out of debt, stay out of debt, and invest 15% of your income, and that'll get you ready for the big dance when the time comes.
I usually approach the question a little bit more technically than you guys. You guys did a very good job of approaching it philosophically. But the first off, you got to know is how much you're going to be spending in retirement. And a lot of people I've talked to, they don't know what their retirement life's going to be like, so they don't really have a good idea what their expenses are. And then, and some people still have debt on the books, and you kind of want to get that taken care of before you retire, so that way you don't have any mandatory payments. And then also you want to have like a nice emergency savings. So assuming that you've been through the Wealth Masters milestones, then you should be in a pretty good place to be thinking about retirement. But it's always a good idea to, especially the first step is to know how much you're going to be spending. And I like the idea of people taking like what they call like a practice year or a couple practice years, where you start to kind of, you think about what your retired life's going to be like and what you're going to be spending, and then try and live your life as close to that as you can while still keeping your job. And then you get more of an idea of how much money you're going to be spending on a monthly basis, what you're going to be wanting to do. And then you can kind of get a better idea of how much you can pull out, if your Social Security and your investments and whatever, pensions, whatever else you have is going to cover those expenses. I kind of like that idea. But like you said, is that you got to be in the mindset where you want to retire. Some people, they really like going into work in the morning. It's their social outlet. And they like being around people. And then if you give all that up all of a sudden, then you're sitting at the coffee shop trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. Other people I know can't retire soon enough, and they haven't done, they don't know what they're retiring towards. They don't care. They just, as long as they don't have to go to the office during the day, any self-discovery or thinking about what they want to do next is going to be better than sitting in their office for another year. And they basically, as soon as they know they have enough to cover their expenses, they're done. And then, they fill the time with having coffee and going to the gym. And if they don't know what to do, fine, then they'll sit down and think of something to do. But there is, like, I think statistically, it's like 30% of people, they don't want to retire towards anything. They just want to be done. And then when they actually finish, it doesn't matter. That's the lesser of two evils for them. When I know other people are super goal oriented, and then they give up their jobs and they're sitting there bored for 3 months, and they're like, all right, well, it's time to start a company or do something else. But yeah, kind of knowing what you want to do is a big part of it.
Well, Tom, if you're talking about the technical aspects of making retirement decisions, one of the things that we work with is what we call the QSR, which is your quit slaving ratio. And the quit slaving ratio is determining how much income you actually could produce from your investments. See, a lot of people, they understand how to accumulate wealth, but what's really complicated in retirement is the distribution of wealth. Well, we can help people figure out their quit slaving ratio to determine if they've saved enough to reach their retirement goals. And for a lot of folks, they have difficulty with that. And that's one reason why we have job security.
You want to break down the ratio real quick?
Well, let's say, for example, that if you determine that for your lifestyle, you're going to do a couple of vacations a year, you're going to visit your grandkids, you want to set some money aside to pay for a portion of your grandkids' college education. Let's say that all of that's going to cost you about $6,000 a month. You have a retirement plan and you've got assets in it. Well, if you do a 4% withdrawal rate from $1 million, that'd be like $3,333. If you have a pension from working as a school teacher, or you have Social Security income, if all of that is more than $6,000, then if you take your retirement expenses and divide it by your income, your QSR is going to be less than 1. You're golden. You can retire. But if your expenses are greater than your income, then you're going to have a QSR which is higher than 1. That means you can't retire. You have to wait until you get that up, or you have to scale back on your lifestyle. Less money towards grandkids' education or less vacations. But that's a difficult decision to make by yourself. And for a lot of folks, they like having the opportunity to bounce those ideas with a professional like what we offer here.
In essence, you want to live off of the golden eggs that the golden goose is laying. You don't want to start eating the golden goose.
Bingo.
In retirement.
People run for different reasons. Some do it so they can enjoy their favorite foods. Others do it for the health benefits, and some do it just because they enjoy it. However, long-term runners will know that it comes with a cost. And Erica, you put quite a few miles on every day, and I imagine probably thousands of miles a year. What are some of the costs associated with running?
Yes. Well, I run because I get to work with you guys. That's how I start my day every day. Otherwise, you wouldn't like me when I came in. My average cost, it depends what kind of year I'm having. Last year was kind of expensive because not only did I have about 4 or 5 pairs of shoes to go through, but I ended up having x-rays and that kind of thing to deal with, because running doesn't just cost you financially, and it actually costs more than most people think. it can cost you physically as well, which is what is coming upon me after about a 35-year career of long distance running. Pounding the pavement does take a toll on your body, despite what avid runners like Drew Coco here might think. But I spend about $700 a year on shoes. I go through them quickly, and I have several different pairs that I have to wear. And if you don't have good shoes, you will not be running for very long. And the associated costs of medical bills, paying for the injuries, that some are from that, some are just because I'm a klutz. But those are ancillary, hopefully. But the actual cost, if you look it up, for a woman who runs, it's about $1,362 a year. For men, it's about $1,000. Now, I don't know why we run more than men, about $300 more. I don't run in fancy clothes. I don't expect to be fashionable while I'm out there on the road. But maybe Drew has something to say. He's the second fastest 50 miler in the nation right now. So what do you have to say, Drew?
I think maybe the cost with money, maybe men are just more stubborn. My wife gives me a hard time for not throwing out old underwear. I'll, not go into detail, but pretty much wear them till it's just a strap. Maybe men are like that with their shoes. But yeah, I can confirm it does. Yeah, you go through a lot of shoes.
That image, Drew.
It's not the most expensive sport. You can essentially do it with nothing. You can just start running naked if you had to. It's not like baseball where you need a baseball and a baseball bat to play. But no, there certainly is some money costs there. Other costs I think are time, pain, injury, and pretty much loving something that doesn't love you back. Time, there's no short way to learn how to run long. If you want to be a distance runner, you have to put in the miles, and miles take a long time. So you really have to love it if it's something you want to do. Pain. Running's painful. I like to think that there's an equal or greater amount of pleasure that offsets the pain. But in reality, I think that runners are just wired incorrectly.
Yeah.
Injury, the more you do it, the more likely you'll be unable to do it. So you really have to balance your approach to your running volume. As soon as you start logging high miles, the odds of getting injured and sideline go up. And then loving something that doesn't love you back. A runner's worst nightmare is not being able to run or having a bad run. The problem is this is going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot. Although the mind and spirit may be willing, the body may not allow you to continue, and that's frustrating, and that certainly is a mental cost there. At the end of the day, are you getting value for all of these costs? For me, I get a lot of value from running, so I don't mind paying the price.
I don't either. As somebody that thought I was throwing in the towel and would never be pounding the pavement again after this summer, the fact that I found somebody that can help me start running better again has been a godsend. I think the costs involved are worth every penny. It keeps my mind clear, keeps my body strong, and I feel like I'm a better person because of it. Plus I get to meet lots of people. My dog is happier, and it's a way to see country and get outside and appreciate what you have around you. And you get to know your neighbors better that way too.
Joe, you run pretty often, don't you?
I used to run very often, but now that I'm 58, I'm feeling all of those miles now. I have a good friend of mine who's in his 60s, who's quite the physical fitness buff, who often says that your heart doesn't care how it gets elevated. It just needs to be elevated. I for one, I ran primarily because it was like eating your vegetables or flossing your teeth. I've never experienced flossers high or the broccoli high that runners always talk about with this runner's high. It never was part of my reality. But I ran because I wanted to stay in good shape. Being physically fit gives me a certain level of confidence that I really enjoy and appreciate. But once I gave up the dogma of having to be a fast runner, and time helps erode that arrogance, I've learned other ways to elevate my heart. And these days I do a lot of jump rope. I do a lot of step ups. I have a step up box in my basement, and I do work out 5 or 6 times a week. I just don't run. I'll run maybe once or twice a week, and almost all of the running I do is mountain or trail running. I usually am running, upwards, where I'm going at a relatively slow pace, but by golly, it sure gets the heart up.
And I will, it's been a while, but I remember that time we went to San Diego, and you and that Division I track star and myself started out for a jog. And once I realized you guys were going to run at world record pace for the next 30 minutes, I veered off and went with the beginners group. But yeah, so it's needless to say, I don't experience, like Joe said, I don't experience the runner's high. Maybe I just don't run long enough to get it. But it's never been something that I've been like, sweet, yeah, I want to keep doing this. So I like to rotate, do the bike, do some running, do some HIIT workouts, and just keep moving it around. But
I would say is that for our listeners is that we've heard all kinds of different opinions on running, and quite frankly, half of the people on this group, Erica and Drew, are quite elite runners. Most of us aren't elite runners, but one thing we all can do is we be in the best possible shape we can be. And I would encourage people to have some sort of physical fitness program where you get out and move on a regular basis, because those people who move regularly, they generally are happier than people who don't.
You saying I'm not an elite runner?
He was talking about you and him.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for Farm to Markets number 16. If there's anything you guys would like us to talk about, leave it in the comments. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.